Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Sophia, your host. When people think of the word hijab, the first thing they think about is the headscarf that Muslim women wear. But is that what the Quran is actually referring to? We are looking at this book by al-Halim Abu Shuqqah, Women's Emancipation During the Prophet's Lifetime. And this particular book in the series is called Muslim Women's Attire and Adornment, in which he talks about the hijab. And he says it has to do with curtains in the Prophet's home. We'll be looking at that now. Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
So, Dr. Shabir, every time I hear mention of the hijab, I always wonder, how did it come to be the Muslim woman's clothing? Like, how did it come to be the head covering?
Language evolves over time. The uses of words change over time, and as people find quick and simple ways of referring to things. But basically, the Muslim woman's head cover is referred to as khimar. And khimar itself is an ambiguous term because in hadith, khimar might actually refer even to a man's head cover. But typically it refers to a woman's head cover. And khimar is mentioned in the 24th chapter of the Quran, the 31st verse. The word hijab, on the other hand, generally in the Quran refers to a kind of separation or a division, something that blocks your view from something else.
So I said curtain. Is that appropriate?
Curtain is appropriate because actually in the verse in question, as al-Halim explains, the word hijab, meaning I said the verse in question, I didn't mention it yet. It's Surah 33, verse number 53. So in that verse, the word hijab clearly refers to a curtain that was drawn in the home of the Prophet, peace be upon him, to separate the private living quarters from the semi-public meeting space. That's where he would welcome guests, and obviously as a statesman, he would be dealing with community and political affairs as well, while giving his family the private space to dwell in.
So what does the verse actually say, Dr. Shabir? Let's start with that.
Sure. So the verse says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tadkhulu buyuta an-nabiy illa an yu'thana lakum ila ta'amin ghayra nadhirina inah walakin idha du'itum فادخلوا فإذا طعمتم فانتشروا ولا مستأنسين لحديث. Let me stop there because it's a longer verse and obviously we need to translate as we go. So far it's saying, addressing the believers, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, or you who believe, do not enter the dwellings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, unless you are invited, for example, to a meal. Rather, when you are invited, then enter without waiting for the food to be cooked. So, you come in at your precise time. And then, فَإِذَا طَعِمْتُمْ فَانْتَشِرُوا. When you have eaten, then disperse. وَلَا مُسْتَأْنِسِينَ لِحَدِيث. And do not linger on in order to make yourself at home to have like casual conversation. إن ذلكم كان يؤذي النبي فيستحيي منكم والله لا يستحيي من الحق. That certainly used to inconvenience the Prophet, and he is shy to let you know, but God is not shy of stating the truth. And then it continues to say, وَإِذَا سَأَلْتُمُوهُنَّ فَاسْأَلُوهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ. And if you are to ask the women folk of anything, then ask them from behind a curtain. ذلكم أطهر لقلوبكم وقلوبهن. That is purer for your heart and for their heart. وما كان لكم أن تؤذوا رسول الله ولا أن تنكحوا أزواجه من بعده أبدا. It is not befitting for you to cause any annoyance to the Prophet or to marry his wives at all, ever after him. إِنَّ ذَلِكُمْ كَانَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَظِيمًا. Certainly that is an enormity in the sight of God. In a nutshell, what this verse is referring to is that people are going there, inconveniencing the Prophet, peace be upon him, in his home. They're not leaving. And, they're making small talk with the women folk. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, doesn't like this. Men generally, especially at that period of time, would have been very cautious about their women folk having, casual conversations with strangers, especially in a more intimate sort of setting like this. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, being responsible for the whole state, he would have a lot of responsibilities to attend to. So a story that explains this is mentioned in Hadith. Anas, may God be pleased with him, reports that the Prophet, peace be upon him, had just married Zainab. And he obviously held a celebration for people. He offered them a meal, and they came, they ate, and they were talking. The Prophet, peace be upon him, left. He went out, and he came back, and they were still talking. And he went out again, and he came back, and they were still there. And he went out again and came back a third time, and they were still there. And in the meantime, Zainab herself was inconvenienced. She had turned her back to the guests, and she was facing a wall, obviously up to her own. Maybe she was making dhikr of God or whatever the case is. But she was.
After a while, you get annoyed if the guests don't go home.
Well, after a while, everybody needs their personal space, and if you've catered for guests, you need some relaxation as well at the end of the day. So, how were they to be told that they need to leave, or how can the Prophet, peace be upon him, maintain private quarters for his family while at the same time functioning as a statesperson? And in this moment, as a host. So the Quran then gave this instruction that people should not talk to the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, without a curtain in between, especially if they're going to request something. If somebody comes to borrow a cup of sugar or something like this, they should ask from behind the curtain. Anas radiallahu an said that this is when the Prophet, peace be upon him, drew a curtain to separate even him from the family. So whereas the Prophet, peace be upon him, was coming in, and Anas was coming in with him, the curtain was drawn between the Prophet and Anas. So because he was obviously not directly related to Zainab, who had just recently got married to the Prophet, peace be upon him. So then the word hijab then, when Anas said that the Prophet, peace be upon him, drew the hijab, it refers to a curtain in the home. It's not a piece of the woman's clothing.
So what does Abu Shuqqah say about that then, Dr.?
Well, to be very clear, Abu Shuqqah is not denying that, the common presentation of Muslim scholars is that women are to cover all of their bodies except their face and hands, and the Hanafi scholars say also their feet can be left exposed. And Abu Shuqqah obviously holds to this last position, so the woman can expose her face, hands, and feet. So he's not against the head cover, which people are now referring to as the hijab. He's just clarifying that that's not how the word is used in this particular verse, because he wants to be very clear about what the verse actually says and what it doesn't say. And the verse doesn't even say head cover, but he takes it for granted that head cover is part of what the verse is alluding to, or at least that fits within the ethos of what the verse is dictating. But at least he's very clear that the verse does not refer to the whole apparatus of what people are referring to as the hijab, including and especially the niqab, which we will have more to say about in a special segment of its own. But he rails against the overuse and generalization of this curtain, because even taking the meaning of the word hijab as a curtain, we find this playing out in Muslim societies generally.
Yes.
Like, you would, for example, he gives some scenarios like, according to standard and classical Islamic rules, you are not a mahram of your cousin, and that means that theoretically you're not prohibited from marrying your cousin. Whether it's a good idea or not to marry your cousins, that's a different issue. But in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, because the societies were small, people to find mates, quickly resorted to marrying their cousins, and this was considered to be quite normal in ancient societies. So the Quran did not prohibit people from marrying their cousins. So, as Abu Shuqqah points out, you will be a non-mahram to your cousin. So let's say I, as a man, I want to visit my female cousin. So I knew her from childhood, and she's my cousin, and I want to pay her a visit. But when I visit her home, because she's mahram to me, in this situation, I wouldn't be able to...
Because she's not mahram to you.
Because she's not mahram to me, yeah. Sorry if I mixed it up. So she's not mahram to me, so that means I'm not allowed to see her according to the classical strict interpretations. So that means she will be behind her curtain or in a separate room, and I'll be interacting with her husband and her children, and that'll be great. I'll enjoy that too. But my main reason for visiting the home was really to visit my cousin.
Mm-hmm.
So the object of the quest is not achieved, right? So of course, Abu Shuqqah is not calling for a wanton disregard of every Islamic principle. He's asking us to live by Islamic principles of decency and so on. But to him, there is no harm if one were to see, if a man were to see a woman in a situation where she's basically covered in a decent way, and the interactions are all decent, and conversations are all above board. But he shows the ways in which in Muslim societies this idea of the hijab has been over-generalized. An important aspect of this, which, perhaps deserve a little bit more time to unpack, is that this verse that we refer to was directly related to the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So you cannot over-generalize and make that a reference to all women, for all women to practice, because it is specifically about the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him. It is they that nobody could have married after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had already married them. That does not apply to women in general.
That's true.
And it is because of this close relationship between the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the believers, whereas the wives of the Prophet are referred to as mothers of the believers. In the same chapter, in the 6th verse, it is mentioned, وَأَزْوَاجُهُ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَأَزْوَاجُهُ أُمَّهَاتُهُم. The wives of the Prophet are the mothers of the believers. That created a kind of a spiritual link between us and them, and it would have been inappropriate for men to harbor romantic feelings towards the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So to cut that out of consideration, naturally the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, were required to have this sort of seclusion, and that could not apply to women in general and should not apply to women in general. Now, Abu Shuqqah is allowing, okay, if a woman in a particular situation finds that it is beneficial to her for her to practice a certain greater level of seclusion than women in general, that's up to her. But to impose this as a rule and make it a generalized concept in all of Muslim society is really to go too far. And it actually robs the family of the Prophet, peace be upon him, from the unique distinction that God had given them in the Quran, their special place in the Muslim societies. Like everyone is acting like them, and that is not the right thing to do. There are some things which are specific to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and believers in general should not emulate. And in this case, there is something specific to the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that Muslim women in general should not try to emulate.
What do you think, Dr. Shabir, about the implications that Abu Shuqqah draws? Do you think that he's a bit too conservative? Would you like to see more than what he has extrapolated from the verse?
That would get us into a longer discussion, and it depends how much time you have for this. But Abu Shuqqah
short answer.
To give you a short answer, Abu Shuqqah is basically operating within a traditional paradigm, and he's showing that within those traditional paradigms, even accepting the basic principles by which the classical Islamic scholars were working, there have been excesses that people have just simply ignored. He is like the young boy who calls out that the emperor is not wearing any clothes. He's not trying to introduce something new. He's just saying, look, if we go by the established principles, okay, here's the verse of the Quran. You said that the verse of the Quran meant that. How did you get to that? Look at this story that explains what this verse of the Quran was talking about. How do you generalize this to all women when this surah itself, has another verse prior to this, the 32nd verse? We're dealing here with the 53rd, so go back about 20 verses. The 32nd verse says that you, wives of the the Prophet, لَسْتُنَّ كَأَحْدٍ مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. You are not like anyone else of the women. You are not like any of the other women. So the women in general, wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, specifically, this whole discourse is about specifically the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Yes, there is a general discourse about women in general in another surah, Surah 24, verse 31. There is another general discourse later on in the same chapter that we're dealing with, Surah 33, in the 59th verse. There it clearly says, وَنِسَاءِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and the women of the believers. So the Quran is very clear in this particular verse about the one that mentions the word hijab. This is specifically about the wives of the Prophet. And then later on, surah, verse number 59 of the same surah, women in general. So you cannot mix the two and confuse everything and lump them all together. So Abu Shuqqah is very specific in not introducing something new. He's just working within the traditional paradigm, and he's showing that people who have pledged themselves to the classical paradigm have nonetheless missed something within that paradigm, and he's just bringing it back to light.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiya and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.